Shocking video. China fires water cannon at Philippine vessel in South China Sea clash. Philippines releases footage of China violence. The Philippines has released footage showing the Chinese Coast Guard deploying water cannons to drive away a Fisheries Bureau vessel operating within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. China claims the South China Sea as its territory, citing vague historic rights. Beijing has dismissed as invalid a 2016 decision by a Hague-based arbitral court that rejected these claims. Since 2023, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has pushed back against the growing presence of Chinese maritime forces within the country's exclusive economic zone. This challenge has been met with Chinese blockades at disputed features and increasingly forceful measures, raising concerns that a miscalculation could trigger Manila's mutual defense treaty with Washington and draw the United States into a conflict with China. 4 Philippine ships arrive at Scarborough Shoal. On Friday morning, 4 vessels from the Philippine Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources arrived at Scarborough Shoal, a rich fishing ground, to distribute fuel subsidies to more than 20 local fishing boats, Philippine Coast Guard spokesperson J. Tariella wrote on X, formerly Twitter. At around 10 a.m., Chinese Coast Guard ships moved in and began conducting aggressive maneuvers, Tariella said. One Chinese vessel came within 16 yards of the Philippine ship BRP Datu Teradapet, about 18 miles southwest of Scarborough Shoal, carrying out blocking maneuvers and firing its water cannon, at one point striking the port quarter of the Philippine vessel, according to Tariella. Another Chinese Coast Guard cutter fired its water cannon at the BRP Datu Tamblot, another Fisheries Bureau vessel, about 20 miles southeast of the shoal, but did not strike the boat directly. Dozens of Chinese vessels monitored by Philippines. Tariella said the Chinese ships monitored in the area included 6 Coast Guard vessels, 2 Navy warships, and a number of ships belonging to the so-called Maritime militia paramilitary vessels that China describes as patriotic fishermen. Despite the unprofessional and illegal actions of the Chinese Coast Guard, which endangered Filipino crew members and fishermen, BFAR vessels remained resolute in their mission to protect local fishing boats, Tariella said. Chinese Coast Guard spokesperson Liu Dujuan, in a statement, accused the Datu Teradapet of approaching and intruding into the waters around Scarborough Shoal and said the Coast Guard had taken necessary measures to drive it away. The Philippine side's actions have seriously violated China's sovereignty and violated international law and relevant provisions of Chinese law. The frequent provocations and nuisances by the Philippine side cannot change the fact that Scarborough Shoal belongs to China, he added. Scarborough Shoal sits about 140 miles west of the Philippines' Luzon Island and nearly 700 miles from China's southernmost province of Hainan. The area is well within the Southeast Asian country's exclusive economic zone, which extends 230 miles from its coastal baselines. Scarborough Shoal incident between China and the Philippines. The latest incident at Scarborough Shoal marks a disturbing escalation in the long-running maritime conflict between China and the Philippines. What began as a peaceful mission to deliver essential fuel to Filipino fishermen has once again ended in confrontation and the use of force by the Chinese Coast Guard. Despite the Philippine vessels operating well within the country's internationally recognized exclusive economic zone, EEZ, China continues to assert its claim over Scarborough Shoal, locally known as Bajo de Masinloc, through gray zone tactics, including deploying water cannons, aggressive maneuvers, and shadowing movements. Military analysts point out that these confrontations are no longer isolated events, but part of a systematic campaign by China to dominate contested areas without triggering a full-scale military conflict. These actions are designed to wear down the resolve of smaller nations like the Philippines, forcing them to relinquish their claims through intimidation. Philippines condemns China's actions. Following the latest incident, Philippine officials have condemned China's actions and reiterated their commitment to protect Filipino fisherfolk. Foreign Secretary Enrique Manalo said in a statement, "We will not be intimidated. We will continue asserting our legal and moral rights in the West Philippine Sea." President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has also vowed to continue patrols in the region, calling the recent Chinese maneuvers reckless and in violation of international law. Meanwhile, China's response has remained defiant. The spokesperson of the Chinese Coast Guard reiterated Beijing's claim that the Philippine vessels had intruded into what China calls its inherent territory. Analysts say this language is designed to reinforce domestic narratives and deflect international criticism. The continued flashpoints at Scarborough Shoal and other parts of the South China Sea not only threaten regional peace but also test the credibility of international agreements, such as the 2016 arbitral ruling which invalidated China's expansive maritime claims. United States support for the Philippines. The situation has also prompted concern in Washington, with the U.S. State Department reiterating that any attack on Philippine armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft will invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty. U.S. Ambassador to Manila, Mary Kay Carlson, posted on social media, "The United States stands with our ally, the Philippines, in defending its sovereignty and ensuring safe navigation." Defense cooperation between the Philippines and the U.S. has been significantly boosted in recent months, with joint patrols and training exercises conducted close to flashpoint areas. The Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDCA, sites in the northern Philippines are also being upgraded in anticipation of potential maritime conflict. Scarborough Shoal is more than a political or symbolic issue. It is a vital fishing ground for tens of thousands of Filipinos who depend on the rich marine resources in the area for their livelihood. Chinese blockades and harassment have crippled the local economy, forcing many fishermen to take longer, more dangerous routes or abandon fishing altogether. Moreover, the shoal sits near strategic shipping lanes that carry an estimated $3 to $5 trillion in annual trade. Any escalation in the region could severely disrupt global supply chains and provoke wider military confrontation involving China, the U.S., and its allies. Observers have their opinions. Observers say that China's repeated use of non-lethal coercive tactics like water cannons, laser blinding, and dangerous proximity maneuvers is part of its broader plan to gradually shift the status quo without crossing red lines that would justify military retaliation. In contrast, the Philippines is increasingly relying on a transparency strategy, publicizing these encounters via media, satellite images, and footage to expose Chinese behavior and gather global support. In recent months, the Philippine Coast Guard and Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources have increased their coordination, with vessels being equipped with cameras, signal jammers, and real-time satellite monitoring systems to both protect and document their operations. Looking ahead, regional stability hinges on how the Philippines, China, and their allies manage the growing tension. Experts argue that unless China is held accountable through consistent international pressure and collective action, its coercive tactics may set a dangerous precedent across other disputed regions, including the East China Sea and Taiwan Strait. The Philippines, though militarily outmatched, is leveraging global alliances and public diplomacy to level the playing field. By documenting and broadcasting every encounter, Manila seeks to expose China's actions on the world stage, framing them not only as violations of sovereignty but also as breaches of international norms. Meanwhile, public sentiment in the Philippines is hardening. Citizens are increasingly vocal in their support for firmer government action and for strengthening defense ties with partners like the United States, Japan, and Australia. In coastal communities, fishermen are calling for more direct protection and sustained access to their traditional fishing grounds. As the Scarborough Shoal incident continues to make headlines, it highlights a broader global concern: the erosion of rules-based maritime order. If the status quo persists, the risk of miscalculation or accidental escalation becomes greater, potentially drawing in larger powers and creating ripple effects across the Indo-Pacific. The next moves made by both Beijing and Manila could shape the security architecture of the region for years to come.